Hi, everyone. We're going to have a special episode that's a merger of the Constantine series and also convergence with the Paul issues we've been discussing in relation to the book of Acts in the series involving Mr. Morgan, Mock. And so we're going to ask a question, a very objective question, and we're not looking at the consequences of what this is did this, is this true? Did Paul bring these pagan figures into Christianity? I'll show you what they are in a second. Provable by the book of Acts and later actions of Constantine, who knew of these links. The first character is Dionysus. This is a statue from like the 4th century BC. Very uh, classic Greek looking person. But by the period after Paul, something will change in the artwork from about the 2nd century AD. So that's the 100s. And this is I forgot. Dionysus is quoted by Paul in Acts 26:14 as the words of Dionysus from the play by Euripides called Bacchantes, is where he says, "You can't kick against the pricks." So Dionysus appears from a classic play that everybody would know in that era if you were Greek or Roman, educated Roman. So, all right. So, how did Dionysus change in appearance and the perception of the people? This is in the 100s AD. I'm going to show you the picture. Look familiar? So, this is according to Wikipedia. This is a painted wood panel. That's why it survived so well, apparently, depicting Serapis. But you have to understand how these words are used in Greek culture and cross cultures. So this is considered the same god as Osiris, Hades, and Dionysus. So they're all like different names of the same person. And this is 2nd century AD, and that's the Wikipedia article you can find that picture on. Looks a lot like someone we all know. And then we're going to learn about, did Paul bring in this woman's effects into our church system? And that's the Pythia. That's a short word for her. She's the Python Priestess, also known as Pythia for short. She gives the oracle at Delphi, and she would sit on a tripod. So there's 3 legs to that chair she's sitting on, and that chair could be very much higher than when it looks like. And do you see there's a kind of a table here underneath her? And that's exactly correct. So we're going to give more details. So I've done more research on the Pythia, the Python Priestess, and I'm going to build that into something that will be extremely surprising when we get to the end. And I'm going to have at the very end bring all these facts together, because it's going to seem a little disjointed at first, because I kind of have to just introduce facts, and then we put them together in a way that you have never seen before. I've never seen before today. So I can honestly say these are pretty interesting to me. So the Dionysus who is quoted in Acts 26:14 is linked. So remember, that's who says you can't kick against the pricks, from the Euripides play, is linked to the Python Priestess of Acts 16:16, okay. So now in 16:16, the Python Priestess comes following Paul and says, while she's still possessed by a demon, she's saying, "This man preaches to us the Most High God," which to her is Apollo. That's who she serves. She's a prophetess for Apollo, and to her that's her highest God. And then she says, "And he teaches us a way of salvation." She doesn't mention Jesus. So this is clearly, she's a demon telling people what to do. And this went on for many days. And remember, she's the most influential person in Europe. What her office, whether in Delphi or Philippi, is extremely significant in European culture of that era, that this woman, whoever she endorses, would gain ascendancy, because everybody, once you learn of the reputation of that person being blessed by her, you have a big future for you, because she's like a star maker. Let's put it that way. So Dionysus through Acts 26:14 is also linked historically to the Python Priestess. We're going to show you those historical links that are behind the scenes here, operating on the pagan minds. Now remember, Malk's book In Defense of Paul, or Paul on Trial, was intended that the book of Acts would be used to defend him at trial in front of Nero, which Paul had appealed from Agrippa Festus to Nero. He said, I appeal to Caesar. I think it was when Festus alone was with Paul. So he appealed to Caesar. He's going to Rome. And that's how the book of Acts ends, where he's waiting for this appeal to Nero Caesar. And so when these gentlemen, Nero and Theophilus, learned of these facts about Dionysus and the Python, as we said in one of our recent videos, this would be very persuasive to them that we have a special case here in the case of Paul, that we better back off. He's got some powerful friends. He's got the Python Priestess. He has Dionysus talking to him in an appearance outside Damascus, because that's who they're going to think it is. They're not thinking it's Jesus. They're thinking Dionysus appeared to him because he's quoting the words of Dionysus. That's what I'm going to try to make you understand. That's what these pagans understood when he said, when this story was recounted by Luke to them in the book of Acts, that's what Theophilus would have concluded, and that's what Nero would have concluded, and that would have tell them you can't kick against the pricks, meaning don't mess with Dionysus. He can hurt you, even though he's a dead and dying god. He's going to resurrect and come back, and that's what happens in the play of Euripides called Bacchante. So let's keep going here. Now, her primary location, the Python Priestess, is at Delphi, Greece. Both the Python and Dionysus worship were long combined at Delphi. And we're going to show you from scholarly sources that that's correct, that they were somehow combined, but in the way it's combined is extraordinary and explains. And I'll give away the surprise. It will explain what you and I think of as communion. Okay, where that really came from. And in 324, Constantine inaugurated the Python Priestess at Constantinople. So we will show that as well. So that's why he's reviving the Python Priestess he had already banned her, just so you know, before he had any association with Christianity back in 303 AD. He didn't like that the Delphic Oracle told the emperor at that time. Now, Constantine was a military commander, and the emperor listened to the Delphic Oracle saying, hey, go after those Christians in the army of Constantine and persecute them and punish them, take them out of there and put them in, whatever. So Constantine was upset because, hey, these are his troops, and he's getting messed up by this Delphic Oracle. So he closes her shop. So she's closed around 303 AD and doesn't get reopened until 324 AD when he reopens her at Constantinople, as we shall see. So anyway, what's significant is in 324, Constantine inaugurates the Python Priestess at Constantinople, as we'll show you from an article. And then a few months later, all show up at the Nicene Conference, which is only 43 miles from Constantinople, was considered a stone's throw. And that's why everyone had come to Nicaea. They were really coming to Constantinople. And so that was the major city there. Nicaea was like a little small suburb. So obviously, you have to also imagine all these prelates, whatever, bishops, representatives who came are going to see the god, the Python Priestess of Delphi has been reset up here. So let's see what we're now. We're going to look at the facts. So first of all, why am I citing Acts 16:16? Because there in Young's literal, it reads this: and it came to pass in our going on to prayer. This is Luke appears for the first time in Acts at all in Acts 16:16. So the we passages begin here. So he has not been with Paul until the Python Priestess incident. So this is how he starts out. And so then a certain maid, she's not a slave. Python priestesses are revered. They're not slaves. So a lot of the other translations have it wrong. Having a spirit of Python, did meet us, who brought much employment to her masters by soothsaying. So the Python Priestess was a huge moneymaker, both in Delphi and out here in Philippi, because people would pay huge sums of money to get a hopefully favorable prophecy about their lives. So people kind of believed it charmed them. And so if she said something good, it had to happen. And that's what they're paying for. So they're hoping that kind of influence her or something. So it's kind of a strange kind of prophecy, if you ask me. Okay. Anyway, And what's the passage we're talking about with Dionysus? That's the Acts 26, verse 14, where Paul says when he's on the road to Damascus, of course, this event happened many years prior to Acts 16, the Python Priestess. So this is when he first encounters who he says is Jesus, who he thinks is Jesus on the road with several companions who also see the light and hear the voice but don't understand the voice, and they are with him. And so it's a real event. It's a real appearance. It's not like some vision in Paul's mind. And that Jesus says to him, according to him in Acts 26:14, that you cannot kick against the pricks. This is and Jesus says it. His Jesus says it in meter, exactly like it would rhyme in the original play. Instead of just straight Greek, it's in meter, exactly as it was in the play. So there's no doubt that Paul's Jesus meant to quote the play itself. So Paul would know of that play. And we elsewhere showed you that Paul's actual job wasn't a tent maker. The primary meaning, and even be even the Greek dictionaries agree that the primary meaning was stagehand, person who sets up stages for theater. So Paul probably had many years of experience listening to these plays already, so he could easily recognize where it came from. But most importantly, Constantine would know. So if Constantine read the book of Acts, and imagine this is also in the archives of Rome, Nero's legal paperwork was still there, probably even in the 300s. So depending on how well they preserve their paper. So, but regardless, if the Book of Acts is in the possession of Christians, there's a chance Constantine could get it. But also, Constantine's son was being tutored by a Christian at the time, just before Nicaea, and that's maybe where he got most of his information about Christianity at all, because he had no contact with Christians until he gave an order to them to show up for he had a kind of a little small banquet before he ordered them to Nicaea, and he had a little banquet with a few of them in I think it was in Rome, actually, not in Constantinople, and that's where he first met anybody, and that's just shortly before, like around 324 time period. So he's trying to influence the Christians uh, very, very late, after a lot of all these time has gone by, and nobody really knew he was supposedly a quote Christian all this time since 312 A.D. This is what he wants people to believe when he had this the appearance of Jesus in the sky to him. Okay. Anyway, long story short is we're now going to show you how this all is coming together. So now what he does is he's going to take the serpent's column. See on the right there, this is a drawing from 1574 on the left there of exactly the way it looked in 1574. So it really was unharmed it was put there in 324. And so this is 1250 years later, and it's still in good shape. But now you can see on the right it's been chopped up by some vandals. Apparently, it still sits there in what's now known as Istanbul. But you can see says it was in 1574. Okay, so you'll see why that's significant in a minute. So what's the serpent column? So the serpent column is also known as the three-headed serpent. It's known as the serpentine column, the Platinane column, or the Delphi tripod. Okay. Uh, is an ancient bronze column at the Hippodrome, Constantinople. We'll get into that. In what is now Istanbul, Turkey. It is part of an ancient Greek sacrificial tripod, and will explain to you how this has some role in sacrifice, which is something I haven't mentioned before because I didn't really know about it until I was doing this research. Originally in Delphi and relocated to Constantinople by Constantine the Great in 324. I hope you can see that. And I put it on another page and I blew it up a little closer so you can't miss these words. So this clearly, Nicaea is what? 325 in June. So he's moved this tripod there, the Delphic Oracle's tripod, and it has only one function. Okay, and we'll get into that. So now an important article was written in a long time ago by Mr. Latte, The Coming of the Pythia. This is, I think, 1940. A really amazing article. Now, what's interesting is he says the Delphic tripod had a cover on which the Pythia sat. So I always wondered, boy, that would be very uncomfortable to sit on those three things. So no, they put a cover in there, and actually it turned out there was sort of a box. So the cover also covered a box, and in that box was supposed to be the sacrifice, as we'll see. All right. And what happened is, this is a cultural thing at Delphi, and we'll have a couple more slides on this, is that the Dionysus cult was also Delphi, the headquarters of it, as well as the Apollo cult of the Python Priestess. And so they kind of fused, and they viewed themselves as rivals to end up getting the Python Priestess to cooperate in doing a sacrifice for them, and she would be the one who would be expected to apparently distribute it to them. So he's mentioning that, and they were considered it early on. So they're around the 400s BC period. I mean, so this Python priestess, by the way, begins almost in the 8th century, like 700s BC, and she goes all the way until Constantine bans her for a period of time around 303 AD, and then she comes back to life in 324, and then she gets rebanned in I think it's 393 by Theodosius. So this is her history. Anyway, so there were these two polarized groups: the Dionysian followers and the Apollo followers. And Apollo is the god who controls the Python. So this arose in Delphic ritual, each struggling for the sacrificial meat, which of course would have been kept in the tripod. So in that little box is where the sacrifice would be. So I guess it doesn't look to me like there's a lot of room. So the sacrifice would be just simply handed out in small bits and pieces. But wait till you find out what this sacrifice is made of. It's not like bread or anything like that. It's a symbolic. It's symbolic of somebody's body, and I'll give it away. Dionysus' body, because the myth of Dionysus in the play of Euripides called Bacchante was that the Titans tear up his body and then eat the pieces of it. Okay, and they're going to eat pieces of the body, and let's just let the scholars speak. I'll just stop there, and we'll hear what they're talking about, because they're just going to tell you what they do know, and I don't want to embellish it. So let's just hear what they're going to say. So now this the author of this latte, the coming of the Pythia. So he or she is going to describe the disputes, or the relationship between the Delphic group of the Dionysian cult and the Apollo/Pythia cult. The majority, however, also unofficial and related to sectarian mysteries, spoke of the Dionysus slain. So I think the majority means the majority of voices of historians, of how they look at it. When the Titans had torn apart Dionysus, so that's what I was mentioning earlier. So when he's dying, they go after his guts and they eat his guts out while he's living. They gave his limbs to his brother Apollo. So that's the connection between Dionysus and Apollo at Delphi. So these are two brothers. So that's why their followers can be working together kind of cooperatively, having thrown them into a kettle. So Apollo takes his brother's limbs and throw them into a kettle, but he preserved them close to the tripod. Okay, so that's why the tripod is connected to this process. I'm going to skip the next sentence. We find his statement confirmed by Plutarch. Plutarch is an ancient Latin author. The people of Delphi believe that the remains of Dionysus rest with them beside the oracle, and the Hoisoi offer a secret sacrifice in Apollo's shrine whenever the Theades wake Lycnites, which means Dionysus. So Dionysus, so this is at Apollo's shrine, meaning when she's doing her sitting on that tripod, and when she's got the tripod filled with next to her is the little box underneath her that has the food, the sacrifice that's going to be sacrificed. This is a secret. It's kind of like her little secret sacrifice in the shrine, and this serves the Dionysus cult at the same time. So she's not independent of the Dionysus cult. She's part of it, but it's all based on this mythology of the connection between Dionysus and his brother Apollo. So I hope that makes some sense. All right, let's keep going here. But somehow they're all going to eat and share in this. So now I wanted you to hear the myth again about the being torn apart, so we understand. So in the article, The Real Yeshua, from May 4, 2018, and there's the URL below that. He's explaining what's in the play by Euripides, and it says the main character in the play is Dionysus, or Dionysus. His father was a god, Zeus, and his mother was a mortal woman, Semele. Dionysus. So notice you can have a regular woman being wedded to a god and produce a child who is himself God. Do you see something there? Dionysus was born on December 25th, too obvious to even mention. He died and was restored to life, but in a very different manner of death from Jesus. Dionysus was torn to pieces and eaten by the Titans, but, quote, eventually restored to a new life. That's end of quote. So he's quoting the play from the heart that was left over. And he was also known as, quote, the God who suffers. So it's whoever put the words into the mouth of Jesus, whether according, the mouth of Paul's Jesus, whether it was Paul who made it up is a possibility, right? It's still a possibility, can't be sure. Or was it God permitted only that remember Jesus said, I'm not going to come back into a private place. Once I ascend, I ain't coming back until every eye sees me. The next time you see me, every eye sees me. And if it's not a universal appearance, it's in some private place, it's not me. This is Matthew 25. It's not me, or 24, 24 verse 5 and then 10 to 20. It says that it's not me. So if they say that they're the Christ, do not believe them. It is not me, because I will not appear to any local group of people in a private place or private room or wilderness. So that's why we know this is Jesus. The Jesus of Paul is not the true Jesus. Cannot be. It would be violative of Jesus's words, his warning. So it would be Paul's Jesus, and God would have allowed Paul's Jesus to use a Greek message from a play, which a Christian of that era would be able to say, oh my gosh, that's too obvious. This is not the real Jesus. Real Jesus would never quote this play. Real Jesus would never equate himself with a God the Son. And the real Jesus would never want us to even imagine he's anything like this God, this God the Son. Instead of what he really was the Son of God, indwelled by the Father. In John 13:10, he says, the Father dwells in me. And that's very, very different. And that's acceptable in Jewish theology, that God can dwell in you, rather than you could be a separate God from God, independent from God. So anyway, that's what's going on here, and that's what he's alluding to. And so the food that was being divided up between the Dionysian group and the Apollo group was symbolically thought to be Dionysius's body kept there in the little box. I mean, obviously the food was freshly cut and killed, but they had this mythical idea that because it's in the Python Priestess's little box underneath her on the tripod below the cover, then somehow this food has been transformed by her sitting over it somehow into the food of the dead and dying Dionysus. Well, the dying Dionysus, who is about to come. When you take this food, his body, what's going to happen to him soon thereafter? Even though his body's been all eaten up, what's left over is going to regenerate from his heart, and he's going to have a new life again. And so somehow, by eating his body and the blood in there, you are going to have a new life for yourself. Now, this is really corrupt pagan way of thinking. That Jesus was saying, you're going to do this in remembrance of me. You're going to eat bread and wine. You're not going to have a meat sacrifice, and you're not going to do anything like this. And it's not a regular thing. So we need to also know Jesus said to do this at Passover. So that's a Passover dinner. And he's saying, when you do this in remembrance of me. So the whole idea of communion on a regular basis is never talked about in the New Testament scriptures, or in our scriptures, Christian scriptures. So let's keep going, though. We got to get moving here. So I want to show you something else. So that seat, look how tall that is. Doesn't that look really tall? Like she's really high up there. So I could not imagine that she was sitting there. It must have been this must be just simply a symbol of the victory. This was a war memorial. It had inscriptions on it that was a war memorial. But it was indeed the seat that she would sit on. So I didn't realize that. I just thought it was too high for that. But no, it's referenced to be a very high object. So in the article Pythia in Wikipedia, and that's really interesting that they picked something like that, which how would most people know to look up the word Pythia? But regardless, that's how they did it. And it says, but ever since the introduction of the cult of Dionysus at Delphi, the god that brought his followers into ecstasy and madness, the Delphic god gave oracles through Pythia, who also fell into a trance under the influence of vapors and fumes coming from the opening, the inner sanctum of the oracle. So just in that sentence alone, can you see the connection between the cult of Dionysus and the cult of Apollo? So they were literally connected through her. So she's serving both cults at the same time. She's not simply serving Apollo followers, but also the Dionysus followers, who are very much like those followers have a belief almost like Christians do, but much more paganized, where you have God the Son, and you've got meat, blood and cutting up this food somehow makes you join with the god somehow in a whatever. So and then it mentions that she has to be older than 50 years. That after one of them was violated in the 3rd century BC, a woman older than 50 had to be chosen. It's mentioned there. But here's what's interesting is as the story goes on in this article Pythia, it says the Pythia sat on top of a tall gilded tripod that stood above the opening. So you see that's gilded. Can you see the substance? It's like a bronze. I think it's a bronze gilded column, and that's what caused it to look shiny and still survive all these centuries later. It's 2000. It's almost 2,000 years now, or 1,700 years. Okay. Anyway, so the Pythia sat on top of a tall gilded tripod that stood above the opening. Now, that isn't the only place this is mentioned. It's in Plato's Phaedrus, and this is in an article by Bernard Dietrich, Divine Madness and Conflict at Delphi, and this is in a journal called Revue Internationale Pluridisciplinaire des Religions Grecques Antiques, 1992, volume book 5. What do you call it? Magazine number 5. Okay. So there's the site if you want to see this. But anyway, this is what he says. The Pythia, he says in the same passage from Phaedrus. Plato is the author of Phaedrus. So the Pythia, Plato says in the same passage from Phaedrus, raved while pronouncing Apollo's oracles from the tripod, although one would have thought that any violent activity might have been dangerous on the high perch. So this is what we're to understand: is she's way up there, and you would think she could easily fall. So having her doing any kind of strange movements on the tripod, you would think she would fall off, because she was doing trance-like things, and so her body was moving in odd ways. But she had three different serpents she could wrap her legs around and make sure she wouldn't fall down. So I think there was a way she could avoid it. All right. Okay, good. Now here's where this is very interesting to me. This is at page 126. This is later in Mr. Latte or Miss Latte's article, where it says, when the Pythia mounted the tripod, she was offering herself up to death in an expiatory act. So the way he views it is that she also became part of the sacrificial process. So even though she's going to have a sacrifice that she'll offer from the tripod little box, she's also somehow a sacrificial element of this. So the tripod is also known as a sacrificial tripod. You'll see sometimes they're called that. And so it says, so she was offering herself up to death in an expiatory act of mourning for the previous killing. So the killing of the animal or whatever, that was part of the distribution of Dionysus' body to the people there. It made no difference whether the victim was called Python or Dionysus or even Apollo himself. I don't know what that means in this context. The Pythia, a mature woman, yet dressed and adorned like a virgin. So we saw that she has to be 50 years old. That was in the Wikipedia article. The only woman in a male society. For no other woman was permitted to approach the oracle. This is interesting. So the men had the exclusive control of the oracle, except if you were the Python priestess. She was given the special honor of coming close. The only woman in a male society who was led to the tripod almost like a sacrificial victim herself. So what that's making it sound like is, remember, there's priests that interpret her words in order to communicate them to the person paying for her prophecies. Well, it sounds like the priest escorted her to this tripod, and she's going to have to climb up there, and it's going to be spoken of like she's sacrificing herself. She too would shudder, and her entire body would quake, but the divine presence welled up out of the anguish and fear. Apollo would be there and would speak. So now, after the sacrifice was over for the Dionysus fans, and maybe the Apollo fans shared in it as well, she would now go up there and do her prophesying, her soothsaying. Okay, so another remark at page 117 of the Latte article. There's something called the Peliac Amphiction of Antella. So this was a quasi-governmental entity that operated in this particular region, that was a semi-autonomous region of self-government. And it took over the supervision of Delphi from the inhabitants of Crisa, and above all, organized the Pythian Games starting in 586 BC. So okay, and I just mentioned those kind of things so you can see the importance of this region in the whole nation of Greece. They're becoming centralized and known for something. And here, this page 118 will make that clear. Delphi was the only Greek community to make religion its main occupation. The basis for this unique role was the oracle's pan-Hellenic and even international fame. That underscores what we're trying to say about the Python Priestess of Delphi and then her sister location in Philippi. It was this, too, that prompted the intervention of the Amphictyony, that group we mentioned. And the Pythian Games were all the more glorious because they were connected to the sanctuary. So it became like a religious festival. And so people were having sports combined with religious sanctuary activity. The god spoke at Delphi, meaning Apollo. Here, piety was firmly embedded in the transcendental world. However, the worldly action that gave rise to the oracle, and which we can grasp, was a special form of sacrificial ritual. And that's something that we didn't really realize. I didn't realize before. I thought it was just this oracle. No, there was a sacrifice that preceded the activities of the oracle itself, and that involved this Dionysus body being divided up to the people, this dying and resurrecting God. Um, the site of the oracle, the place of pronouncements and liberating purifications, was first and foremost a place of sacrifice, outdoors, high on the mountain. So it really tells us why. If you were Constantine reading this, what would you think you could do? You have the Python priestess has to have a sacrifice beforehand. There's going to be some meat. There's going to be some blood. There's going to be distribution to the people. So that should be part of your pagan worship. And then she's going to do her oracle thing, and she's going to get paid money for it. And it's going to bring a lot of attention, worldwide, international fame to Constantinople, right? So that was his intention. So there had to be some sort of ritual like that. So what would he want Christianity to do to make it fuse better, make it more similar? Well, doing exactly what's known as the Eucharist clearly would be the same kind of thing, almost with the same words spoken of by a priest. So now he needed a whole order of priests and all this stuff, and put them on payroll as well. So let's see if there's more here. Okay, I think that's it. Wait, oh no. Now here's the summary. I put these all in points so we could see it. So there's a lot of disordered facts I just gave you that they're not in any particular order. But watch, when you see them all together, I think you'll see all of them will be on one sheet here. So first we have, what do these things represent? The Delphic oracle. It's an Apollo or sun worship. And Constantine is a sun worshiper. He showed that when he was in Rome, living there. He created all the coinage with Sol Invictus coins, and on there it said, companion of Sol Invictus. And then on the other side, it said Constantine. 2, the Python Priestess is Apollo's prophetess or diviner. So she's important, and therefore if she blessed Paul as teaching a way of salvation, this would definitely have an extremely positive effect on Nero and on Theophilus. It should have a negative effect on Christians, and therefore the book of Acts was not meant for us to read, because we would have maybe the early church had a negative view of Paul, but I don't think they would want anyone to know that the Python Priestess was endorsing her, particularly the enemies of Christianity, endorsing Paul. They wouldn't want the enemies of Christianity to know that. These are kind of like our dirty secrets, not something you want to boast about, but you need to tell Nero this, and you need to tell Theophilus, because those are the guys who have your future in their hands. 3, Dionysus was a god, the son of a father god, a dying and resurrecting god, per the Euripides play, a play that Constantine would know. So he could see the irony and the interesting use of this in creating a Christianity that would conform to what he believed in, which was Apollo and these Dionysus myths, because they were interconnected. The Apollo and Dionysus stories all interconnect. And so turning Jesus into Dionysus is Dionysus is a form of God that would match what he wants us to be, even though it might be in his mind Apollo or whatever, but it's definitely how he wanted to envision Jesus. Okay, the Python, number 4, Python and Apollo and Dionysus, these three, are all centered in Delphi until in 303 AD, approximately, when Constantine, as a military general, not as emperor, orders the oracle shut down because the Python told the emperor of Rome, I think it was Diocletian, but I think that's later in time. It begins with the letter D. I don't have it at the moment, but it's in another video we did. So he ordered that the troops in Constantine's own army should be persecuted if they were Christians. Constantine didn't like that, and he found out that the emperor did this because the oracle had decreed it, so he shut down that oracle. But he did that as a military commander. He was not yet emperor. Okay, so Constantine had a son whose tutor was a Christian, and therefore he could have learned about these events in the book of Acts involving Dionysius' words being quoted from a play by Paul's Jesus, and he might have been impressed that, hey, this is a religion that believes in exactly what I believe in. There's a God the Son, and so that could be how we were picked by Constantine, depending on what year his son had the tutor and so on. 6, what if Constantine sees Paul's quotes Dionysius from Euripides' play, "You cannot kick against the pricks," in Acts 26, verse 14? Yeah, so just what I said. He could definitely decide we are the religion for him. So it has nothing to do with him admiring Jesus at all. And notice he never talks about Jesus. He talks about, nothing about the master, nothing about his words. 7, what if Constantine hears from the tutor that Paul is followed by the Python Priestess? That's the priestess of Apollo. Well, he'd be very impressed because he thinks he's Apollo. So he go, okay, here's somebody who the Python Priestess long ago had picked out, and he's one of the founders of this religion, or was a prominent leader. That's what you would think, just reading the book of Acts. You'd think he's some influential person. He might not put 2 and 2 together, that all that's happening here is he's a criminal defendant, and we're now being obliged to defend him at trial, and that's really what's going on. He has a notoriety, not from a good thing, but from a bad thing, and we have to defend him, and that's really what happened. 8, Constantine fantasizes he is Apollo as of 324 AD, so that's important. So this is before Nicaea, just a few months, maybe less than a year, obviously, and probably more like 6 months, because the meeting was June 325 at Nicaea. And then in 324, Constantine brings the Delphic oracle to Constantinople. So he's reestablishing the center of paganism is now going to be at Constantinople. And he's doing this at the very same time he's setting up the Nicene Council for the next year. He's planning that way ahead of time. And he's doing pagan things at the same time he's setting up that. So he's doing his role Remember, he's legally the Pontifex Maximus. He's the high priest of every religion that operates at Rome. He can change your bylaws. He can get rid of bishops. He can appoint bishops. He can run any church he wants at will, and he does. And he's showing his chutzpah. And of course, then the propaganda had to follow, which is that we had lackeys and placaters who covered up for him, and that's really sad. It's tragic, actually. And number 10, in 324 AD, Jesus is recreated into a god exactly like Dionysus, a god the son who is deprived of his powers. Hold on. Of his powers, is killed and resurrects, whose body is eaten symbolically. So, I mean, everything ends up showing you that there is no accident between the fact that Paul had these experiences that would appeal to Constantine, and we end up with a religion that matches Dionysus and matches the Apollo practices of his prophetess, and the distribution of the meats that really were symbolic of Dionysus's dying body, and that dying body would be resurrecting, and that somehow connected you with a new life as you ate it. The resurrection of the flesh of the Dionysus would be happening to the people who are eating the flesh. That's what Christians are thinking, is somehow eating the Eucharist. It's symbolically saying we will have eternal life too. So there is no accident in any of this. This all comes out of these passages that Constantine built a religion upon, and forged a new vision of who Jesus was, based on this Dionysus vision getting into his head, getting out into the open at the Nicene Conference, and that's the God we got at Nicene Conference. Not a God who's spoken of in the Bible. Nothing like this in the Bible at all. Not even in the New Testament. It's just made to look that way. All right. God bless. Take care, everybody. Ciao. Good night.